The gym buzzed with parents and judges, but I could feel the shift the moment the laughter started. My son stood by his project, handmade, clumsy in some spots, but his, while a group of boys from a private school circled, smirking, pointing, calling it cute. I tried to stay back, to let him stand on his own, but my hands were shaking. Just when I was about to step in, the doors opened and a woman none of us recognized walked in wearing a name tag that made everyone stop talking. What she did next didn't just rescue his project, it rewrote how my son saw himself. Her name tag read, Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief Scientific Officer, Thorne Institute for Environmental Research. The title alone seemed to suck the air out of the immediate vicinity. The smirking boys, resplendent in their matching navy blazers with embroidered crests, fell silent, their earlier bravado deflating like punctured balloons. Even the adults, who had been either oblivious or politely ignoring the subtle cruelty, straightened up, their expressions shifting to ones of keen interest. Dr. Thorne was of average height, with silver hair pulled back in a neat, functional twist, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a simple, dark trouser suit, a stark contrast to the more floral or brightly colored attire of many of the mothers. There was an aura of quiet authority about her, a sense of purpose in her unhurried movements as she began to walk slowly along the rows of projects. My heart hammered against my ribs. Leo, my Leo, stood frozen beside his trifold display board, its title Urban Lichens, Nature's Unseen Air Quality Monitors, painstakingly lettered in his neatest hand. His gaze was fixed on the scuffed toes of his sneakers, his shoulders hunched. He'd spent weeks on this, evenings hunched over the kitchen table, our small apartment filled with the smell of craft glue and the faint, earthy scent of the lichen samples he'd carefully collected from park trees and old stone walls. I remembered those nights vividly. The soft glow of the lamp illuminating his focused face, tongue poking out from the corner of his mouth as he mounted a particularly fragile piece of bark onto a card. "Mom, look at this one," he'd whispered, holding up a gray-green specimen. "It's called Xanthoria parietina. It's more tolerant to pollution, so if we see a lot of it and not much of the really sensitive ones like Usnea, it means the air quality isn't great in that spot." His enthusiasm had been infectious, a bright, pure thing. We didn't have much, not since his father left, but we had these moments. I'd sit with him, nursing a cup of tea long gone cold, offering encouragement, helping him cut straight lines with the utility knife when his smaller hands struggled. We'd talked about the scientific method, about observation and hypotheses. He'd meticulously recorded his findings in a spiral notebook, his handwriting evolving from a childish scrawl to a more confident script over the weeks. The display board itself was made from salvaged cardboard, carefully painted white. The charts were hand-drawn, the photographs printed at the local library. It was a testament to his effort, his passion, a stark contrast to the sleek, professionally printed boards and expensive-looking kits that surrounded it. The group of boys who had been tormenting him belonged to St. Augustine's, the most prestigious private school in the city. Their project, a few tables down, was a gleaming model of a magnetic levitation train, all polished metal and blinking LEDs. It was undeniably impressive, but I wondered how much of it was truly the boys' own work. Their parents stood nearby, beaming, impeccably dressed, radiating an air of confident expectation. One of the judges, a man with a weary expression and a clipboard, had already passed Leo's table. He'd given it a cursory glance, a polite but dismissive nod, and moved on. I saw Leo's face fall, a flicker of disappointment dimming the hope in his eyes. He tried to engage, to explain his findings, but the judge had already been looking towards the next, more elaborate display. That glance, more than the boy's taunts, had felt like a physical blow. It confirmed the unspoken message, "You don't quite belong here." My fists clenched at my sides. The urge to stride over, to shield Leo, to fiercely defend his earnest work was almost overwhelming. But I knew, deep down, that fighting his battles for him wouldn't help in the long run. He needed to find his own strength, his own voice. It was a painful lesson for a mother to learn, this stepping back. Doubt not at me. Had I pushed him too hard? Was I setting him up for disappointment by encouraging him to compete in a world where resources often overshadowed ingenuity? Dr. Thorne was moving closer. She paused at the St. Augustine's maglev train, listened attentively to the boy's polished presentation, nodded, and asked a few pointed questions that seemed to momentarily fluster them. One of them, the ringleader of the earlier mockery, fumbled for an answer, his face flushing. Dr. Thorne didn't press, simply nodded again and moved on. My breath caught in my throat. She was approaching Leo's section. The intervening projects seemed to blur. I saw her pause at the table next to his, where a girl nervously explained a colorful model of a volcano. Then, she turned. Leo, sensing her approach, straightened up a little, though his eyes remained downcast. He fiddled with the edge of a lichen sample glued to a card. He looked so small, so vulnerable. I wanted to run to him, to whisper that it didn't matter, that I knew how wonderful his project was. But I stayed rooted to the spot, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Dr. Thorne stopped directly in front of Leo's display. For a moment, there was absolute silence, or so it seemed to me. The general hum of the gymnasium faded into a dull roar in my ears, my focus entirely on this one woman and my son. She didn't speak immediately. Her gaze scanned the entire board, from the hand-lettered title to the carefully arranged samples, the hand-drawn charts comparing lichen types found in different areas of our city. Her expression was unreadable, thoughtful. I remembered Leo's frustration one evening, when his graph paper smudged. "It's ruined, Mom," he'd cried, tears welling. I'd gently taken the paper, shown him how a careful erasure could fix most of it, how imperfections were part of the process. "Science isn't about being perfect, sweetie," I'd told him. "It's about being curious and persistent, and honest about what you find." He'd taken a deep breath, nodded, and meticulously redrawn the affected section. That memory, the scent of eraser dust, and the quiet scratch of his pencil, felt so vivid now, so precious. Dr. Thorne finally lowered her gaze to meet Leo's. He flinched almost imperceptibly, then, to my surprise, lifted his head a fraction, a spark of his earlier determination returning. "Urban Lichens, Nature's Unseen Air Quality Monitors." Dr. Thorne read the title aloud, her voice clear and carrying, though not loud. "An interesting choice, young man. Tell me about it." Her tone was not condescending, not perfunctory. It was genuinely inquisitive. Leo swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced at me for a fleeting second, a silent plea for reassurance. I tried to convey all my love and belief in a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He turned back to Dr. Thorne. "Well," he began, his voice a little shaky at first, "lichens are really sensitive to air pollution. Some types can only grow in very clean air and others are more tolerant." He pointed to a photograph he'd taken of a vibrant orange lichen on an old brick wall. "This is Xanthoria parietina. I've found it in lots of places, even near busy roads." Then he indicated another, more delicate, feathery-looking specimen. "And this one is a type of usnea. It's much rarer in the city. I only found it in the quietest part of an old cemetery, far from traffic." Dr. Thorne leaned closer, examining the mounted samples. "And what methodology did you use for your survey?" she asked. "How did you ensure consistency in your observations?" This was it. This was the kind of question that showed she was taking him seriously. The kind of question that validated his efforts. Leo seemed to gain a little confidence. I divided the city map into 1-kilometer squares," he explained, pointing to a hand-drawn map pinned to the board. "And then I tried to visit a park or a street with old trees, or a quiet area in each square. I'd spend about an hour in each location, looking for different lichen types on trees, rocks, and walls. I took photos and small samples if there were plenty." He gestured to his notebook, laid open on the table. I recorded what I found, and the date, and the location. Dr. Thorne picked up his notebook, her expression thoughtful as she scanned a few pages of his neat entries. The silence stretched. The group of St. Augustine's boys were watching, their earlier smirks replaced by expressions of grudging curiosity. Other parents, and even a couple of the judges who had previously skimmed past, were now drifting closer, drawn by the focused attention of the renowned scientist. You noted the substrate for each sample, Dr. Thorne observed, still looking at the notebook. Why is that important? Leo's eyes lit up. This was something he'd spent a lot of time thinking about. Because different lichens prefer different surfaces, he said, his voice stronger now, more animated. Some like acidic bark, others prefer alkaline stone. So, if I only looked at one type of tree, I might miss some species. I tried to look at lots of different things. And your conclusions? Dr. Thorne asked, finally looking up from the notebook, her gaze direct and encouraging. Leo took a deep breath. Well, it's just a small study, he said, a touch of his earlier humility returning, but it looks like the areas with more heavy traffic and industry have fewer types of sensitive lichens and more of the tolerant ones. And the big parks and older residential areas with less traffic, they have more biodiversity. It suggests that the air quality really does affect them, even in a city. He gestured to his hand-drawn bar charts, which, despite their lack of digital polish, clearly illustrated his findings. I even made a little map showing the hotspots of good and poor lichen health. Dr. Thorne studied the charts and the map for a long moment. I held my breath. This was the culmination of weeks of his solitary, dedicated work. The countless bus rides to different parts of the city, the careful peering at tree trunks and stone walls, the meticulous cataloging. I remembered him coming home one rainy afternoon, soaked but triumphant, because he'd found a tiny patch of a rare, delicate lichen he'd only seen in books. His small hands, chapped from the cold, had carefully placed the Ziploc bag containing the damp specimen on the kitchen counter as if it were treasure. And to him it was. To me, his perseverance was the treasure. "This is excellent work, young man," Dr. Thorne said, her voice resonating with sincerity. "Truly excellent." Leo blinked, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. A slow flush crept up his neck. "What you have here," Dr. Thorne continued, turning slightly to address not just Leo, but the surrounding onlookers who had gathered, "is the essence of good science. You started with an observation, a question. You developed a systematic methodology to investigate it. You collected data meticulously." She tapped Leo's notebook. "Your field notes are commendable. And you've drawn logical conclusions based on your findings." She looked directly at Leo again. Many university students would do well to be this thorough. The polish of a presentation is secondary to the integrity of the research and the clarity of thought behind it. Your project demonstrates a genuine passion for discovery and a sound understanding of the scientific process. She then pointed to one of his hand-drawn charts. "This particular correlation you've shown between proximity to major roadways and the decline in Usnea populations is compelling. Have you considered what your next steps might be if you were to continue this research?" Leo, now standing straighter than I'd seen him in weeks, looked thoughtful. I'd want to take air samples too," he said, his voice gaining firmness. "To see if I can directly measure pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides and see how they match up with the lichen distribution. And maybe study the lichens over a longer period to see how they change with seasons or if air quality improves or gets worse." Dr. Thorne smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her serious features. "Those are precisely the right questions to ask. Keep that curiosity, Leo. Keep that rigorous approach. It will take you very far." She extended her hand. "Congratulations on a superb project." Leo, almost reverently, reached out and shook her hand. His own small hand was dwarfed in hers, but his grip, I could see, was firm. "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The shift in the room was palpable. The group of St. Augustine's boys, who had been listening with wide eyes, now looked distinctly uncomfortable, some even a little abashed. Their expensive maglev train suddenly seemed less significant. The judge who had dismissed Leo's project earlier hovered at the edge of the crowd, his face a mixture of surprise and mild chagrin. Other parents were murmuring, their expressions respectful, their gazes now fixed on Leo's humble display with newfound appreciation. They weren't just seeing a clumsy, handmade board anymore. They were seeing what Dr. Eris Thorne, a leading figure in the scientific community, had seen: genuine scientific inquiry, passion, and potential. Dr. Thorne gave Leo another encouraging nod and then, with the same quiet dignity, moved on to the next project. But the atmosphere around Leo's table had irrevocably changed. It was as if a spotlight had been switched on, illuminating not just his project, but him. A few moments later, after Dr. Thorne had moved further down the aisle, one of the judges, a different one, a woman with kind eyes who had been observing the interaction, approached Leo. She spent a long time looking at his board, asking him thoughtful questions, much like Dr. Thorne had. She, too, commended his methodology and his clear presentation of findings. The original group of boys who had been mocking him had dispersed, melting back towards their own project, their earlier arrogance gone. One of them, the ringleader, actually caught Leo's eye for a brief second and gave a jerky, almost embarrassed nod before looking away. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement. I finally let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding for an eternity. My hands were no longer shaking. A warmth spread through my chest, a quiet, profound sense of pride that almost brought tears to my eyes. Leo wasn't looking at me. He was carefully, almost tenderly, readjusting one of his lichen samples that had come slightly loose. But his shoulders were back, his chin was up. The defeated slump was gone. He looked taller, somehow. When the official judging concluded and the awards were announced, Leo didn't win the grand prize. That went, perhaps predictably, to a highly sophisticated robotics project that had clearly involved significant adult expertise and funding. He didn't even get second or third. But he did receive a special commendation for outstanding independent research and scientific inquiry. As his name was called, a genuine smile, bright and unreserved, spread across Leo's face. He walked up to receive his certificate, his steps confident. The applause for him was warm, and I noticed Dr. Thorne, standing near the back of the room, was clapping too, a small, appreciative smile on her face. Later, as we were carefully packing up his project, Leo was quiet, but it was a contented quiet, not the anxious silence of before. He handled his display board, his samples, his precious notebook, with a new kind of care, a new sense of their worth. "Dr. Thorne was really nice, Mom," he said softly, carefully placing his certificate into his backpack. "She was," I agreed, my voice a little unsteady. "She saw how much hard work you put in, sweetie. She saw how good your science is." He nodded, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. He didn't need to say anything more. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Dr. Thorne's words, her validation, had been worth more to him than any blue ribbon. She hadn't just praised his project. She had affirmed his intelligence, his curiosity, his capability. She had shown him that his ideas mattered, that his efforts, however humble their presentation, had real value. As we walked out of the gymnasium doors and into the cool evening air, Leo carried his trifold board himself. His grip on it was a little tighter than before, not with tension, but with a quiet sense of ownership, of pride. The streetlights cast long shadows ahead of us, and the city sounds, the distant traffic, the murmur of voices, seemed softer, less overwhelming. The gym still buzzed with parents and judges packing up, the remnants of youthful ambition and parental hopes lingering in the air, But this time, as we left it behind, all I could feel was pride. A deep, resonant pride not just in my son's achievement, but in his resilience, his quiet courage to stand by his work even when it was hard, and the beautiful, unshakable curiosity that I knew would indeed take him far. He carried his project not as a burden, but as a badge of honor. And I knew, with a mother's unwavering certainty, that he was already seeing himself and his place in the world a little differently, a little more clearly.